I probably should warn you ahead of time that this is going to be a challenging devotional today. It's connected to the devotional I did on Monday. I mentioned in Monday's devotional, or actually follow-up to the devotional, that I've been entertaining and answering the second most frequently asked question, which is this: when can we come back together? I did give some information about when I expect it will be able to come back together for corporate worship in that update, the follow-up to that devotional, but I think there may be much better questions to ask. The challenge for this devotional is in the question form, and it came from an online seminar that I participated in that was hosted by the National Office of the Christian and Missionary Alliance, and I was challenged in that seminar. The seminar was put on by the Send Institute, and the topic was this: leading churches through post-COVID-19. And this question was asked approximately halfway through the seminar, and it was a chess question. And the question was this: can we win without the Queen? Now, in chess, the Queen is the most powerful piece on the board. The Queen, in this analogy or this metaphor, was defined as the corporate worship service for the church. Therefore, the question really means this: can we win the game? Can the church win the game if the corporate worship service is taken out of the game? The Queen is removed from the game. Now, I actually think there are some really good follow-up questions now that the Queen has been removed from the game. And here's one of those first follow-up questions: God, how dependent have I been on the Queen to define my spiritual experience? Here's another follow-up question: God, what are you teaching me about my role in the game now that the Queen has been removed from the game? She's taken from the board, the corporate worship service. Now, here's my practical perspective on all this. God has shut down the corporate worship service in America for this time, for this season. Essentially, we have been kicked out of the building, pushed out of the building, not allowed to do corporate worship. But the church was never about the building or corporate worship. It's always been about people. Now, please don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying gathering together is not important. In fact, the Bible tells us to gather. Don't forsake the fellowship of the brethren in Hebrews. I'm not saying that corporate worship isn't important, but we are still called to win the game even if the Queen, the corporate worship service, has been removed. It's like we're experiencing what the early Jerusalem church experienced, which is kind of interesting. The larger group of disciples were holed up there in Jerusalem, worried that they were next after Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. They were holed up in Jerusalem. And it took the martyrdom of Stephen to scatter the church in all of the surrounding communities. This is why I think follow-up questions are very important. The text for today's devotional takes me to a passage that I've been wrestling with for 5 years now, and to be honest with you, I'm not sure that I'm going to be done wrestling with it anytime soon. And the Lord is teaching me a ton through it. You'll find the text in James chapter 1, beginning in verse 2. The familiar text there is this: count it all joy, my brethren, when you meet trials of various kinds, in this case COVID-19 and the Queen being removed from the board. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. So this thought comes to my mind: what is my role in the game where the Queen has been removed? Do I count it joy that the COVID-19 trial has come and removed the Queen from the game? Do I count it joy for this trial as the Lord shines light on my role without the Queen in the game? Was I relying, another question, follow-up, was I relying too much on the Queen to play a role I'm to be playing? When I quote this text from James, I usually stop at verse 4. But verse 5 is tremendously helpful in the thought process for this devotional. Here's what James says in verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. Now, how special is that promise in the current game without the queen? The queen has been removed, and we're being called still to win the game without her. And God tells us to ask for wisdom, and he'll give it to us generously without reproach. That is why I believe there's other questions than the question, when can we get back together? That's a good question, but there's other questions as well. Trust me, I do think it is a good question, when are we going to get back together? But there's other questions like, God, what are you trying to teach me about my elevation of the queen's role versus my role in the game without the queen? God, give me wisdom about the important role that I play in the game as we can't come together. I believe God will answer those questions. Without being able to invite people to church in this present season, we have been scattered like the early church with the gospel. It's as if we've come full circle to being the early church, fulfilling the Great Commission as we go. Isn't God amazingly fresh in his work? What is your role? What is my role as he has closed the church building and sent us out into the community? Do we count this trial as joy as we are being perfected in our going with the gospel? Peace and blessings, Pastor Scott. Now, thanks for watching this devotional video. If you would like to see more, please be sure to click the subscribe button, and you won't miss further devotionals and messages from our YouTube channel, our Maranatha Bible Chapel YouTube channel. If you also like this video, be sure to click the like button and follow us on Facebook. Peace and blessings, Pastor Scott.